Good evening, everyone. I am so glad to have you with us tonight. I appreciate your taking time to be with us in this study. We start a brand new series and topic tonight, and I hope it's one that is going to be useful for you. We'll say more about that and jump into it in just one moment here. I will say just a real quick word on something else first. If you're watching this live, it's Sunday, June the 21st. Hope it's a good day for you. Obviously, Father's Day, and certainly want to acknowledge that. I hope that you have or had a wonderful father like my sisters and I did. Our fathers are not perfect. The Scriptures tell us that, and we know it. And if you are a father, I'm sure it's been pointed out to you that you're not perfect. But my goodness, where would we be without fathers? And I know some in our audience probably didn't have a father who loved God, loved his children. I can't even imagine what that would make life like. But I know that we all join in giving thanks for our fathers, and if yours is still with you on this earth, I hope you've told him today how thankful you are, how much you love him. Also want to mention quickly another significant day of this week from 2 days ago. June the 19th, which has the unofficial name of Juneteenth. What a great occasion. I'm embarrassed to admit that I only recently understood the true significance of that day, why that day instead of the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation is especially recalled. And it's a day that I'm hoping may soon be officially recognized as Freedom Day. That would be wonderful. I tell you, in this country and in all parts of life, we dare not forget or try to erase our history. Instead, though, I think we learn from it and know that every one of us can always do better. So both today and June the 19th, I hope these were meaningful days for every one of us. Great for reflection. Well, let's jump into our study. I really appreciate your being with us. As always, I will try the very best I can to do right by you and not waste your time. And we're going to take a look at a multi-part topic here called Why Would I Believe That? Examining our faith in the light of science and good sense and logical belief. Happens to be something, a topic and an approach that is very dear to me. And for quite some years, I've really been immersing myself into this when I realized the importance of it. And here's why and who this is designed for. What we want to do with this is really determine, does it make sense? Not just do you want to believe in God, does it make true sense in every way to believe in a creator or not? And why? We need to be able to examine that and not afraid to ask the questions and truly look for the answers. I know most of us, no matter who's listening to this, and by the way, if you're listening to this, if you're not sure that you believe in God or you're pretty sure that you don't, you are a welcome guest here, truly an honored guest, and this series is for you. This series is also for the person who knows that they believe in God, but maybe they would have a hard time explaining exactly why they know that He exists, other than a heartfelt emotion perhaps. And this is for the person who knows they believe, but maybe very quietly, somewhere in the back of your mind, you do have nagging doubts because of what the world throws at you, telling you, no, there's no God, and you're not very bright for believing that, but as long as you keep quiet, we'll be okay with you anyway. Well, that can wear on you after a while. So if you want to examine this question, no matter what angle or direction you're coming from, this class is for you. And I think it's important material, very important for everyone so that we can arrive at a belief and be confident in it. Now, not everybody's going to like this class, and I know that, so I'm going to do you a favor here because there's a lot of good classes going on here. Andy Connolly teaching an excellent class series, as always, which is live streaming, and of course, a number of the classes are on Zoom meetings right now. That you can tune in. So there are some of you that I know won't like this, and I just want to go ahead and tell you that, maybe as a favor. If you don't really enjoy intellectual pursuits, you're not going to like this series. Some people really don't enjoy having to think hard about things. Other people love it, and so you know who you are. But if you lose attention and interest in things like that real quickly, then you're really not going to like this class. And I don't want to torture you, until you finally figure that out. If you're not willing to examine these questions, now that would be a shame. Either if you're an atheist or a believer and you're not willing to consider the other viewpoint, now you're not going to like this class, but you probably ought to watch it. But there are a lot of people who won't. Now I'll tell you, if you are involved in any way, whether professionally or even just what you love to read, etc., if you're involved in the sciences, I think you will enjoy this discussion in any field probably of them. If you're a lawyer, I think you'll like this discussion because of the logic in it and what we're going to look at. Or if you're just very much interested in the philosophy of thinking and what is truth. Pilate asked that question. It was a very important question, even though I don't think he grasped what he was asking. That's what we want to look at. What is truth, and why would I believe that? Well, let's dig in then to our subject here. We'll see how far we go. And by the way, as I said, this is going to comprise many parts over the coming weeks. And what we may do is every few weeks, just to give your mind a break, etc., we may take 1 week out from this and cover a different completely different topic, and then come back to this. So we'll see where it takes us and what we can cover with that. And I know also as we embark on this, I just want to make sure you know, I am going to try very hard not to get so deep in the weeds that it just makes your eyes glaze over and you completely lose all interest. And especially if your background is not in the sciences, where this will take us. I assume that most of our audience are very intelligent adults and teenagers, and this is for you by all means, but who maybe don't have a background in the sciences. So my job should be, if I do it right, is to present the truth and useful logical information, present it in a way that it's useful to you, hopefully present it in a way that's interesting, and also make this subject material, some of which may be outside your field, but make it understandable to the intelligent adult from a different field. And I'm going to try hard to do that. So it's a raging question, and it always has been, from the earliest days of humanity almost. You see it in the pages of the Old and New Testament for sure, and there's almost not a week that goes by that you don't see something about this question or challenging this or how outdated such a belief would be, etc. Now, I also know that this topic has been addressed by a whole lot of people over the years from all sides, many of whom, if not all of whom, are smarter than I am. So you might think, well, what in the world? You may think I've heard this before. I don't even need to listen to this. However, in being immersed in this for years and hundreds of hours of reading, truly, because this is so important to me, there are things that even outstandingly intelligent people, I read it and I say, no, you didn't mention this. This is very important, because having spent a lot of a career now working in scientific and medical fields, I know the things that come up over and over again, and they're fair questions that need to be addressed. So there may be something, even though it's just me, and I'm not being falsely modest with that, there may be something that I can bring to this discussion that you might not have thought about before. So I hope that would be useful. Well, there is the question then, do you believe in God? We'll put more context with that in just a minute. But you probably kind of know either you do or you don't, or you think you do but you're not sure, or you kind of think you don't. And in fact, if you're a teenager or a young adult, etc., you may be wondering, it's like, yeah, I've been going to church all my life, it's okay, but I'm not really sure if I believe that or not. Well, you know what? I'm going to tell you, don't feel guilty for questioning it as long as you're honestly questioning it. So whatever your answer to that currently, I hope your mind will be open. But here's the bigger question. Do you believe in God? Why? Or why not? Do you have a reason for that? Could you articulate that? If you had an honest questioner who wasn't sure they agreed with you, could you tell them something reasonably convincing, or maybe really, really convincing as to why you believe your answer to that is the correct one. And so again, if you don't believe in God, welcome. You're an honored guest here. I hope you will listen to this information. I would look forward to you proving me wrong, because I'm open to that. But wherever you're coming from, I hope that you are interested in exploring why do you believe or not believe, or somewhere in between. So that's where we're going to go with this. Well, here are our goals for this discussion. First of all, let's determine what is logical to believe about the existence or the myth of God, and exactly why you believe what you do. So that's what we were talking about just a second ago. Second, have a firm basis for that belief that lets you stand on it without being afraid you're wrong, or without doubt about whether you're wrong, and without embarrassment about what you do or don't believe. And by the way, on any topic, whatever it is, we ought to be able to discuss these things just like we've looked at in past topics, with perhaps sincere misunderstandings about what do the Scriptures say. Well, on these topics also, we should be able to have a discussion, and in fact, in the best sense of the word, we ought to have a good argument about it. You know what I mean by that? An argument being not a contentious, heated back and forth, a fight. No, an argument being a connected series of logical thoughts which can lead us to understanding or conclusion. So we ought to be ready to very kindly, very respectfully argue, if you will, about these things, so that we all come to a more firm basis for what we believe, and we're always learning and modifying that belief if need be. We need to be able to respond confidently and convincingly when confronted with challenges to our beliefs. So we should be open to that. And they don't need to be in anger or with ridicule, going either way. So we should be able to not be afraid to be confronted with challenges. I hope you will challenge me, no matter who you are. Tell me where you think that I got it wrong, and let's have a great discussion about it. And we should have no hesitation to consider all ideas presented. We're going to talk about that so much more in just a little bit here. Finally, we need to be confident enough to approach other people. Once we figure out exactly what we believe or don't and why, and once we are confident that we have a solid basis for that, well, we need to not be afraid to stand on it then, because whatever we come up with, there are people who need to know the truth about this, and that's different for different people, very different for different personality types. And so I hope that we will start to figure out too, what one person is looking for is not the explanation that another person wanted. Even though they're both true in every respect, our minds all click a little bit differently. So that's kind of what our goals for this discussion are. And here are some principles for this class discussion and beyond. I hope you agree with these. The first is that we ought to be able to ask anything and question everything. But inherent with that, if you want to do that, you have to be looking for the answer if you're going to question things. You have to be willing to follow where the evidence leads. And you have to be willing, if it takes you to a conclusion, to do what that evidence requires. And some people don't want to do that. They don't want to know the truth. They're not willing to follow the evidence if it takes them in a direction that doesn't agree with what they've always thought. But we have to be willing to do that no matter what the topic in life is. Second, since you were given a brain, either because God gave you one or because it evolved or whatever, if you've got a brain, use it. It's there for a reason. Don't let anyone do your thinking for you. Don't let anybody tell you what to believe and you just accept it without skeptically, critically questioning it. Healthy skepticism is a term you'll see us use. This topic, especially this one, this is way too important to let somebody else tell you what makes sense and what you ought to believe. You got a good brain. You're probably very, very good at what you do. So let's use our brains. especially if God gave us those, I think He would expect us to use them, and I could give you some scriptures for that. By the way, you'll notice this class discussion is going to be a great departure from my usual, because I love the scriptures, and you've already figured out where my beliefs lie with this, but my job now is to convince you and convince me that my beliefs make sense. But I love the scriptures. I have every belief that they did come from God, although that's not what we're going to base this class on. So oddly enough, this is one Bible class or Bible-related class where you're not going to see me, not very often, mentioning verses from the Bible. Now, we will. It's, believe me, not that I'm ashamed of them or hesitant to use them. It's just that you don't use the Bible to prove the existence of God. We'll come back to that. But we do need to use our logic, our intelligence, and every source of information that we can. All right, next principle is we have to follow the intellectual honesty that we would like other people to follow. If you're talking with somebody who has a different belief than you do, different understanding, and you feel sure that yours is correct, do you want them to deal with it dishonestly or refuse to consider it? No. You want them to be open to considering it, so what do you and I have to do? We can't embrace or discard any idea, either one. Either one is a fallacy without serious and fair consideration. So, and I know many of you will consider this to be probably almost a sacrilege, and you won't like this class, because we will give consideration to this basic question, does God actually exist or not? And even though I have come to a conclusion, it's not set in stone, so to speak. Now, I don't see the evidence changing, and I will always keep my mind open to reconsidering it. But here's what I mean. If I'm not willing to examine fresh ideas and reconsider that belief, then it's really not much of a fair and honest belief. And I hope that you may have to think about that for a minute, but I hope that you feel the same way. And here's another way of stating that, perhaps. If my belief can't stand up to scrutiny and doesn't agree with the evidence and information that we see available to us, then my belief probably needs to change. That's what we're here for. All right, so if we want others to be open and intellectually honest and deal with information fairly, we have to do the same thing, and we can't embrace an idea and accept it without considering it, and we can't throw one away either. And that's what we ask of everybody in this discussion, no matter what your current belief or inclination may be. Finally, there will always be disagreements. We will never all come to exactly the same agreement, but that really is no reason that there should be any less respect and kindness and affection and hope shared between us. That's true, again, no matter what topic we're on. So those are some principles that I think are important. Well, here's a fair question. You might say, and look, a lot of atheists or agnostics have asked this question, and I think it is a fair one. And sometimes believers will ask this as well. Why doesn't God just make himself just blatantly apparent? Why doesn't he just, appear right before us right now? Why doesn't he write across the sky, I am, in every language? Why doesn't he interrupt every single radio, TV, or internet broadcast in the world in every language and say, I am God? Why doesn't he do that? Well, in times past, he almost has, and it's written down for us, but that's not what we're going to rely on at the moment. I've heard Bill Watkins give a very good illustration, and he's so true. That if he appeared in this auditorium or right in the middle of us right now, it would get explained away. Bill made that illustration far better than I ever could, but at first everybody would say, wow, that was undeniable, and then it would be like, well, that could have been a mass hysteria event, maybe just kind of a mass hallucination where they all convinced each other that they actually saw something that never happened, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's faith. And here's my hunch, and I can't tell you, including from the Scriptures, I can't tell you because God doesn't ever explain, to my knowledge, here's the way I did it, and here's why I didn't do that. But it's consistent with what you did see there. Jesus did numerous miracles which were irrefutable, but He didn't do them on demand. And here's what I mean by that. He did do them on request in many cases, for reasons of compassion and healing. But when people said, hey, show us a sign, He refused. In fact, at one point He said, yes, there is an ultimate sign that I will show you, but not yet, the sign of Jonah, etc., implying that His final and ultimate miracle was yet to come and they would see it. But He didn't do that. He didn't do party tricks, you might say, just for people's amusement or because, they said, hey, yeah, if you're really Jesus, show us a sign. Could have, didn't choose to. I think, as is the case perhaps with His parables, He may have wanted to see who was paying attention, because He put it all there, just like the existence of God, as we may see later on. The evidence is everywhere if you're looking for it, but in His parables, the meaning was there also if you were looking for it, but if you didn't want to hear it or you weren't thinking, it would fly right over your head. Do you know how many times He finished a parable with saying something like, he who has ears to hear, let him hear? Or we might put that in modern language, hey, if you're hearing this, listen up, think about it. Listen for the rest of it. And then sometimes His disciples ask Him later on, what did it mean? And He would explain it to them. But if you weren't looking for the meaning, all you heard was a nice story. That may have something to do with why He chooses to scatter evidence all over the place, plenty of evidence, as we will see, but not spoon feed. So some faith is required. But that brings us then to the crucial question, what is faith? Because an awful lot of people would say faith is just believing something that you've been told. Is that right? Well, it could be, but there would have to be a whole lot more to it than that. I get told a whole lot of things that aren't true. So I wouldn't consider it a great virtue or, a great tribute to my intellect to believe everything that I'm told. That's not faith. Okay, well, is faith believing something you want to believe because it gives you hope, it gives you some kind of peace, etc.? And I know an awful lot of people who do believe in God, but really this is why. They believe because they want to believe. Well, that may be admirable, but it doesn't make a lot of intellectual sense to believe something because you want to, or because it makes you feel good, or because it gives you some kind of peace. That's fine, I guess, but in my thinking, it's not enough. That's not a basis for believing something. My goodness, I could believe all kinds of things that aren't true, and they'd make me feel good until finally I got smacked in the face with the reality that what I believed wasn't correct at all. And there are things I could tell you right now that you if you have a brain, you would know, that's not true. I'm not believing that, and you shouldn't. Is faith believing something for which there's no proof? That's what a lot of people would tell us, that any kind of belief in God is, that it's not logical, etc. And depending on how we can support that, they may have a fair accusation if we have not put in the time and the study and the digging to know why we believe something and if that evidence is actually valid or not. So believing something for which there's no proof, that still misses the mark, I think. What about this? Something that has no rational basis, as I said a moment ago. I don't want to believe something that has no rational basis. As you'll see in a moment, I believe things I haven't seen, but they make sense. There's a reason that I believe them. So here's what I would tell you that a better definition of faith is It's believing something that you haven't yet seen based on a rock-solid and probably evidence-based trust in the reliability of the source of that information. Okay, does that make sense? It's not believing something that makes no sense. It's not believing something that couldn't really be true, or I want to believe it makes me feel good, etc. No, it's believing something that I haven't seen yet, but I thoroughly believe and have reason to believe the person who's telling me that. That is faith. Can I give you a quick illustration? If let's just suppose that at the moment, of course, thanks to our friendly virus, I'm still talking to an empty auditorium here. But let's just suppose that there were 100 people in front of me here and we were together, as I hope we will be soon. Okay, and I tell you, I've got something in my hand, and in fact, it's a $50 bill. Okay, and if you will hand me $1 and tap my hand twice, I will open it, and the $50 bill that's inside my fist here will be yours. Well, you'd like to believe that, wouldn't you? Yeah, sure, that sounds good. Well, you haven't seen it. I mean, you know, there's no proof for it yet. Maybe no real reason to believe that. In fact, let me just give you a hint. If I tell you that, don't believe me. Probably not true, all right? You would be wise to have a little skepticism about that. Okay, but let's just say that I tell you exactly that, and so the first person from the audience just says, well, okay, I'll find out. Let's find out. Hands me $1, taps my hand twice, I open my fist, and sure enough, there is a genuine $50 bill, and I give it to them. Oh, wow, okay. And then you're thinking, oh, okay, I wish I had done that. But he won't do it again. So I say, okay, now, who's next? And so somebody else maybe will come and say, well, yeah, okay, sure, you made good on it once, I'll give it a try. So they hand me $1, tap my hand, I open it, and yeah, sure enough, they get a genuine, spendable $50 bill, all right? And let's just say this happens 35 times in a row. Okay, now, you know this is fiction, that I would either have that or that much money or that I would give it to you. But at any rate, but you get the point. After a while, you begin to believe that, yeah, I think I do believe that. I'm going to walk up there, hand him $1 and tap his hand. I've got some faith. Why? You've got a reason at that point to have faith. You still haven't seen what's in my hand when you come up here, but now you have an evidence-based, solid reason to believe that what I'm telling you is truth, because now the source has been proven reliable. So to me, that is faith. Now, you may think, oh, no, a real noble faith, that's just believing what God has said, because God has proven who He is, if you are a student of the Scriptures, etc. So no, it's not believing something that doesn't make sense. He's given us every reason to believe. And again, I think if He gave us brains, He's expecting us to use them. And so He has given us. We have an entire book full of credible eyewitness documentation and testimony of His appearances, His actions, etc. We have a reason to believe. Look at Hebrews chapter 11. We sometimes, we'll call it the Hall of Faith or the chapter of faith. And yes, those are good terms for it. I've started calling it the chapter of rock-solid evidence, because when you read those stories in there, you start seeing that the people in there, they believed God, and they believed Him enough to step out and take action on things that they had not seen yet and maybe wouldn't see for many, many decades, in some cases not even in this life. But they knew who was telling them because He had proven Himself. And look at that chapter. What you see over and over again is these people acted in faith because they had seen who God was, and sure enough, their faith was vindicated. There was a reason for it. It wasn't a blind belief or wishful thinking. It was believing something you haven't seen yet because you had every reason to believe the source. So I definitely believe in faith, but I'm going to present to you that we have every reason to believe in that source. But I have to prove that to you, or I have to give you overwhelming evidence for that, I should say. All right, well, let me just digress for a moment and say, yeah, there are two levels of faith, because we know faith is not just believing something. It's putting it in action. But, so believing something that you've not yet seen based on your belief, your valid belief in the source, that is faith. The Scripture, of course, tells us faith without works is dead. Okay, it's great to believe, even the devils believe and tremble, James said. So you need more than that. But that's where it starts. Believing is where it starts. So the faith of believing in and acting on the promises and commandments of the Bible, it is based on thousands of years worth of documented solid evidence and demonstration of who God is. But the first step before you can put faith in action is to have that believing faith. So the more fundamental faith in the very existence of God, because that's what we're talking about, is similar. It's a logical, solid belief based on critical analysis of available evidence. Now, I know by now there are a number of people who have already tuned out, and look, that is okay. I would never, ever be offended if this discussion was not for you. But I hope for some others of you, you say, okay, I want to see where you're going with this. Okay, yeah, I want to see this. I hope you are saying that. If you are a person of any age, but especially maybe a young adult, wondering, does it really make sense to believe in God? I hope you're saying, all right, show me that. I need to see that. If you're inclined not to believe in God, I hope you're saying, all right, I want to see this. I think I've heard all the silly arguments before. Let's see if yours is any better. I hope I can be up to the challenge. But here's the thing. It has to be on a critical analysis of all available evidence. There can't be any circular reasoning if we respect our own intellect and if we expect others to have any interest in what we have to say. I think you know what circular reasoning is, but here's the example. I can't tell you, oh, yes, I believe in God. I know God exists because the Bible says He does. And I know the Bible is valid and authoritative because it came from God. That is the classic example of circular reasoning. Now, those statements may be true, but they can't just prove themselves. They can be true if there is some external evidence and logic to support those as well. But you see what I mean. You can go back to what is probably also the classic example. If I tell you, oh, did you know my mother is the Queen of England? You may ask me, how do I know that she's the Queen of England? Well, because she told me that she was. And I know that my mother would not lie to me because, after all, she's the Queen of England. You get the picture. Circular reasoning is no good on any side, not for those who believe in God and not for those who believe in some other things. There can't be that. We have to respect our own intellect. There has to be intellectual honesty, and especially if we want anyone else to be convinced by our logic. So why not just believe? And I know still there would be many people who say, well, you shouldn't be asking questions like this. You should just believe. Well, I want to believe what's true. And I want to be able to tell other people, hey, this is true. Here's the evidence. Here's why you should believe this. Because after all, it could turn out to be a really, really important question that I need to tell other people about. Well, I hope that you can see the slide. And by the way, after several weeks, we will start having some notes pages available if some of this is something you want to look at and pick apart at your leisure. So I would propose that the very deep emotional connection of our faith, that which gives us eternal hope and changes our lives here on earth, is built on absolute confidence that God exists. You know, some people also may look at this and say, wow, man, that guy's faith is just like it's nothing but a logic textbook. What kind of faith is that? Oh, no, faith, and this is probably a lot of our audience that I'm talking to, faith is conviction that runs all the way to the deepest levels of the heart and soul. It gives rise to emotion and passion and conviction. It gave rise to many people throughout history of a willingness to lay down their lives because of what they believed. It wasn't cold, hard logic. But I will say, though, it's based on that. It's based on confidence, that absolute confidence that God exists and that the Bible is reliable, not the other way around. I don't choose to believe something because of the emotion. So when faith is built just on emotion and not solid logical belief, it can be like a house built on sand. It may erode and it may crumble, and it may not take very much of a challenge to bring that whole belief system come crashing down. I've seen it happen. I've seen people who believed, but they couldn't be sure why. They weren't absolutely convinced thoroughly that it was really true. And then life challenges came, not just because somebody said, hey, you're stupid for believing in God, but because of tough things that happened in life that made them question, and there wasn't a whole lot of root for the faith. I want our faith to be different. So finally, though, as I've alluded to, if our faith is built on emotion, and I can't really explain to you logical evidence for believing that, why would somebody else believe it? You know, we titled this lesson series, Why Would I Believe That? I want to know why I would believe that, but even the bigger thing, I guess, is why would I want somebody else to believe it if I can't really give a solid basis for it? So, in light of those principles, and that was important, I hope you stuck with me through that. Let's pose some questions that every person, no matter who they are, no matter what they believe or don't believe, every person on earth needs to consider. And we could perhaps agree, whatever you think the answers to these questions are, that's fine. We'll get to that. But I think we might all agree that they're actually important questions. Is there a superior entity? And I will freely refer to him as God. And I think no matter what your belief, I hope you will understand that if I say God, at the moment, I'm not even necessarily saying that has to be the God described in the Bible, but I'm saying, is there a creator? Is there an intelligent designer and creator of this universe, this planet, this life, etc.? Does it really make sense to believe? Well, that's an important question. I recently saw, it was a transcript of a BBC documentary. Some parts of it a few weeks from now I'll bring back to your attention again because it's important and fascinating. But it was talking about how did the very first life come about from non-living materials, maybe in the depths of the ocean, etc. And at the end of it, it was enjoyable because it had a lot of good scientific research work in it. And in many cases, the bias in it was just unbelievable. But at the very end of it, it kind of wrapped it up by saying, you know, if we can figure these things out, we might be the first people in the history of mankind to know where we came from. We'll come back to that. But it's an important question. And yes, the world hungers for this question. If you don't believe in God and you find out that actually He is real, that was important. And at the same time, some people might say, well, the safe belief is just go ahead and believe in Him, and then if He's not real and there is no God, well, at least that was the safe choice. I don't want a safe choice, okay? I don't want to change my life if it's not true. I don't want to be bound by some commandments, even if they're good, etc. I don't want somebody telling me what to do if they don't even exist. I want to know, and I think it's important. So there's a question that every human needs to know the answer to. And following that, if there is a creator, if there is a superior entity, if there is a God, do we have any reliable communication from that entity? Okay? Basic questions. Don't be afraid to ask them, and they are not sacrilegious if we're truly looking for the answers. All right, so with those questions in mind, okay, you'll laugh at me, and you should. I'm a nerd, start to finish. But I'm going to kind of put these questions on here. And this little chart that we're going to uncover here in the next few minutes, again, I hope everybody, atheist, believer, no matter what, I think this flow chart will make sense to you as to a logical flow. there's our basic question, the one we're going to really delve into. Is there a God? Well, if the answer is no, and I hope that the slide comes through there, if the answer is no, nothing really matters. I mean, just my advice, be a decent human. Do what seems right to you, whatever that is to you. I mean, I guess you should follow the law because we have decided as a society that there are some things we have to agree on and some behaviors that we all have to kind of live by. But just be a decent human. The kinder you are, the happier you'll be. It'll be a better world, but you really do what you want because there's not really any right or wrong. There's just what seems right to you. All right? But if there is a God, if the answer is yes, then the question, as we said a moment ago, becomes, well, okay, has he communicated with the human race? If the answer is no, it takes us right back to just, okay. Well, and there are some people who think that there is a creator and that he created the universe. They're convinced there's no other way that could have happened. And he maybe created life or just gave it a little start or something, but that he is uninvolved in humanity, that he has not communicated with us, that he's just out there. Okay? And if that's the case, well, it's almost as if he didn't exist. Just be a decent human, do what seems right to you. If the answer is yes, that he has communicated, then we would need to ask, is the Bible valid? And in fairness, some other books also that may claim to be communications from God, although there's really not another book that is widely accepted that claims to be so. Now, I will say in respect to some of my religious friends who have some different beliefs, some of them have different books. And so, yes, we would need to look at those too. But I've put the Bible here because that's the one that so solidly claims to be a communication from God. So the question would be, is the Bible valid? Well, if the answer is yes, then we need to follow it gladly and precisely with our heart and mind. I mean, what other choice could there be if we determine that there is a God and that really is a book that he gave us? We ought to love that book. We ought to just not be able to get enough of it and be ready to do everything it says, not just what I think I can calculate that I can get away with, etc. And if the Bible is not valid, then we would look to say, okay, is there some other source of communication that he's given us? And if we can find one, then yeah, follow it with all your heart and soul, if you can find it to be a communication from God. Does that make sense? Okay, I know it's nerd to the hilt. But it makes sense, doesn't it? We've got to know, is there a God? And so that would be my little decision tree there. So that first question then becomes the one of paramount importance. If there is no God, then I know the Bible's a fabrication and everything else. Nothing else matters. That's what I have to know. So I know in some cases, especially for those who have concluded that, yes, there is a God and the Bible is real, it seems like we're just under attack constantly, doesn't it? I mean, it seems like every week is a fresh assault on your faith and your intelligence, oh, how quaint, how naive, you believe in a creator. We believe in science. I believe in science too. We're going to look at that. That's why we're going to spend so much time looking at that. But I wanted to say this, and for this moment, I'm speaking to those who are believers, and you know you are, because, yes, it's difficult. And this is not a new thing, but I think the attacks on your belief have become more bold, far more vocal, and perhaps more insulting than they were in times past. I don't know. Things have been pretty bad any number of times in the world. So it can seem like we're in a war. But again, just speaking to my believing friends here for a moment, let me say this. It can seem like a war, but that's not an excuse for us to get nasty, okay? It's not a war. What we need to do, if we're in conflict, and we may be if you decide that you believe in God, our weapons need to be faith, the real faith like we talked about, solid information that I can respectfully share with people. And isn't that completely consistent with 1 Peter 3:15? To always set apart or exalt Christ as Lord in your heart and always be ready to give an answer a defense, a logical argument, a solid basis of reason. Give an answer to everyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is within you. That's why I know this study is proper and important and biblical, because he told us that. So our weapons should be faith and solid information and confident knowledge. Our tactics should be preparation. If you'll stick with me, we're going to spend some time doing that. Respect, even for those who don't agree with us, even for those who might malign us and criticize us. Is that not biblical, that we treat people with such respect that some of the worst of them will finally be ashamed for the way they have dealt with the truth? But we can't get down in the mud. Our tactics need to be kindness, true kindness, to go with that respect. Genuine concern for people, whether they agree with us or not. And finally, our strategic goal, it's not winning arguments. It's not dishing back to the people who have insulted us. Our strategic goal is crushing our adversary, and that's not the person we're talking with. That is Satan. Crushing our adversary by rescuing his victims. That's what it's got to be about. I don't hate the atheist. He can hate me if he wants to. I'd rather engage in an intelligent discussion and see which one of us can look at the evidence. But I don't hate the atheist. I hate the person who has taken him captive, if indeed what I believe turns out to be true. And so that has to be our goal. You get the difference. Okay, so as we dig into these questions that all humans need to consider, is there a superior entity? Is there a God? Does it make sense to believe that? And then finally, after that, if we decide yes, do we have any reliable communication? Well, we looked at a little chart a moment ago as to kind of what that might look like. So, to answer that first most important question, here's how I think we could approach it. There are things that are obvious to every one of us, no matter who we are, no matter what we believe, obvious phenomena that demand explanation. And this is quite obvious, even though you might not have ever really thought about it like this, but I think we need to. If we don't start approaching each of this one logical piece at a time, we won't put together logical conclusions. So we have to break it down and look at it, and you'll see why in a moment, because the answers are not automatic. So these demand explanation either by the existence of a superior entity or without one. So here they are. Now you could organize these different ways, but here's the way that I've organized these thought into 4 questions or 4 phenomena. So the first one is the existence of all the matter and energy in the universe, which is overwhelming. We can quote figures, and next week I may give you a little bit of information on this, but I promise I won't spend a whole lot of time on it. It is mind-boggling, just truly mind-boggling, almost beyond fathom, how much matter and energy in the universe. Okay, had to come from somewhere or get there somehow, that's clear. So how did that happen? Next is the precise structure and organization of the universe and this solar system and this planet, etc. We'll look at that. Next is the initial appearance and survival of life, any kind of life, no matter how primitive, something living when before that there was nothing living. So how did that happen? And then finally, the diversity and the complexity and the precision of function of life that we see. The human body, other animals, plants, etc. Again, just unbelievable precision and complexity and high-level function. So that has to be explained. So there are 4 questions, and let me just give you a quick little preview of then where we're going to pick this up next week. And I hope that you will join me. And again, these notes will be available in a couple of weeks here. All right. So down the left column there, I've put those 4 questions or phenomena that we just talked about that require an explanation. The first 2 columns are some of the theories. And by the way, I'm going to kind of interchangeably use theory, hypothesis, proposal, idea, maybe even argument, etc. There are technical differences between those, but for the moment, I'm going to kind of just refer to those. What is the proposed explanation? And I may use any of those words for that right now. So the first 2 columns are possible explanations or hypotheses involving a superior entity. Like you'll see down one column there, the explanation for every one of those is that God created it. That's how it got there. Okay, and then some other alternative theistic mechanisms, maybe not exactly that, but something involving a creator. I put a double line there then, and on the right half of the screen are some proposed explanations that don't involve any kind of a superior or supernatural entity. And so we'll pick up with that next week and start looking at what those are so we can then figure out how do we determine what is true. And that we get into in a big way next week, because if we don't figure out a valid method for determining what is true and what makes sense, well, we have no hope of ever arriving at a correct conclusion. And I will tell you, next week, when we get into that, I think you will probably see some things that you haven't thought about before, and a light may start to go on like, aha, that's how you could arrive at that conclusion, and here's why that may or may not be valid. I hope this is useful, and there's probably going to be 3 of you that, that will still find this interesting and want to stick with it. Hey, but for those 3 of you, thank you. I want to hear from you, and I hope to see you next week. And for every single one of you, I hope you have a great week ahead.
Thank you for joining us online. Please join us again for our next service. Our worship services are in person and online, Sundays at 8:15 and 10 o'clock. Our Bible study is online only Sundays at 5 o'clock. Our summer series is online only Wednesdays at 6:30. You can also watch our daily devotionals and other special presentations on Facebook on the Creve Hall COC videos page. Again, thank you for joining us online.